powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Right now, global system is under serious stress. The war involving Iran is already shaking the global energy market. And whenever tensions rise in the Middle East, everyone starts looking at the same place on the map, Strait of Hormuz. Because a huge portion of world's oil flows through that narrow passage. And I can promise you that this video is not about Strait of Hormuz, so don't worry about it, okay? Now, this whole instability that we are seeing right now in the global oil market, it didn't start with the war, actually. Even before Iran crisis escalated, the global trade was already under pressure. Over the past year, what we are seeing is tariffs, sanctions, trade restrictions have become much more aggressive tools of geopolitics. Then what happened in Venezuela, you can see that. The threat is already being made on Cuba. Then the whole idea is to implement the Monroe Doctrine, even to take Guyana under the grip as well. Guyana also has oil, if you didn't know. So in other words, trade and supply chains themselves are now part of geopolitical competition. Welcome to the multipolar world. Now, when you put it all together, something becomes very clear that global systems are becoming unreliable. For example, if you look into it, then the Panama Canal debacle happened earlier in year 2025 simply because of China. They wanted to get rid of China from there. Venezuela, same thing. China, they wanted to get rid of China, right? So the global systems are becoming unreliable. Energy routes are becoming more and more unstable. They can be disrupted. Payment systems can be weaponized. Supply chains can break overnight, right? So countries are starting to figure out how to actually tackle this problem. And some countries are actually very smart to implement some mechanism, which I call a strategic backup, into their foreign policy. This is not some traditional alliances. This is not going to be a rigid treaty system, but the ability to keep trade flowing, maintain military cooperation, and secure critical supply chains, even if the parts of global systems stop working. So, and one of those most interesting examples of this day is the relationship between India and Russia. And most people still think that relationship is mainly about the oil. And I've said this thing many times in my videos, but this is the first time I am actually doing a dedicated video on this, that India and Russia's cooperation goes far beyond oil. If you zoom out, you start seeing something much bigger. That India and Russia are gradually building strategic backup for each other across multiple layers. Whether it is supply chains, defense cooperation, payment systems, diplomacy, you just name it. So if you enjoy the deep analysis on geopolitics and changing world order, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Your subscription and liking helps me grow. So please do that. And if you want to go deeper into global system structures, global power structures, how they are evolving and all, please do go check out my book, Emerging World Order 2025, which is available on in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. So in this video, let's break down how India and Russia are becoming each other's strategic backup. So let's start with the first mechanism, and I want you to pay attention to this mechanism. Okay, this is very important. Okay, see, supply chains, especially the energy supply chains. Now, India is the second largest importer in the world. Okay, oil importer, that is. And right now, India imports roughly 4.6 million barrels of oil per day. And we all know that as the economy grows, what's going to happen is that number will only grow, that number will only increase, right? So the energy security for India is not just some economic issue, some occasional economic issue from here and there. It's a national security issue, right? So now let's look at Russia real quick, okay? And then we will dive deep into this thing. So stay with me. Now, Russia is the largest energy producer in the world, and with the growing share of its future production is tied to Arctic energy projects. What's going to happen with the Arctic energy projects is that when Russia did the calculation, what they found is that Arctic energy itself can grow Russian GDP by 2% annual. At that rate, that's how important Arctic is for Russia. Okay, and Russia used to be part of the Arctic Council. And Arctic Council consisted of 7 countries, and Russia was one of them, and US, Canada, then few other countries were there too. Okay, but after the Russia-Ukraine war, Russians were sanctioned. Okay, and when Russians were sanctioned, they were kicked out of the Arctic Council. And when they were kicked out of the Arctic Council, then India and China, and then few other countries are there too. So don't think that it is that because of sanctions other countries are not going to participate in it. But India and China primarily, they entered the Arctic. China called it Polar Silk Road, and India actually is working with China on the Polar Silk Road. Normally India is not part of BRI, so you have to understand this. Okay, little bit of tiny nuance. Now so that's how India and China actually got into the Arctic. Okay, now coming back to Russia, what does Russia offer here? Russia is offering energy depth, critical minerals, and other things, lots of other natural resources from the Arctic and from the Russia itself. And then India has the massive demand for all these things. As India enters the fourth industrial revolution, these demands are only gonna grow. Okay, so this is very important. Now when you look at the map, I will show you. Okay, then you see that Russia actually holds the almost the 50% or 53% of the Arctic land mass. Okay, and rest of the Arctic land mass goes to the Arctic countries including Canada. And out of that 50%, actually 80% of the natural resources, oil and everything else actually falls into the Russian territory. So meaning that Russians have taken the major chunk of all that into their own territory. So if Russian energy will flow towards Asia, those supply chains will eventually what? Intersect with the Indian Ocean trade routes, right? Why? Because if you look into it, let me actually share the map real quick. Okay, so this will be a lot easier for me to explain. All right, and this is important, guys, so just pay attention. Okay, so there it is. All right, so what's happening here is that somewhere around here there is your North Korea, and if you look into it, somewhere here is Vladivostok right there. Okay, Vladivostok right here. Okay, and from here, if we zoom out, you find that Vladivostok Chennai corridor is there. Okay, so from uh, here, let me remove this, and I'm just gonna draw it real quick. Okay, all right. So from all the way from somewhere around here, there is a Vladivostok. From here, you can take it here. You can come from here, the state of Japan, like this. Vladivostok Chennai corridor is there. Okay. Now you have to understand this. This is very important because India has signed free trade agreement with Europe as well. Okay. Now since India has signed free trade agreement with Europe, so what India is going to do is that, and India also has signed the defense partnership with Europe as well, the European Union. So that's going to be from uh, either from Gulf of Aden. This is what Europe has proposed, okay, and from here to Greece and all that. But India has said that okay, we go into Oman, sorry, from UAE, from somewhere around here, then Saudi Arabia through IMEC. Okay, the both are available. Okay, but at the end of it all, we know the story right here. What's going on right in the Strait of Hormuz? This is Strait of Hormuz right here. Okay, so India can actually go through Oman and then to Saudi Arabia and UAE and all that. But that's a different story. But right now, this looks like this is messed up. So India is gonna take the Suez Canal and go through Europe, Italy, and all that. Okay. But what if I told you that this is gonna be even more interesting if India starts to take straight up the Arctic route right here? Meaning that if India starts to do whatever they have to do and then directly go to Europe right here. So whatever India does, then India can simply go from directly to this route and then take the Arctic route and go here. Okay, so so technically this is giving India alternative route as well. Okay, and this becomes that's one important. Okay, because India is working with Europe on this thing that the uh, the European Union, the free trade agreement, all that trade corridor and all that. Okay, it's in works. Free trade agreement has been signed, so this is gonna happen. All right. Now, next thing is this. Next thing is another problem. Another interesting thing is Canada. Okay, so India is actually working to finalize the free trade agreement with Canada as well, and India has already signed some uh, trade deals with Canada as well. What is that trade deal? Trade deal comes from Canada from here, right here. That is northwestern passage. Okay, so there are two things: northern sea route and northwestern passage. So what's going to happen is that why Arctic becomes even more important is that there are two major power countries that are in the Arctic at this point. That is, one is your Canada, other is Russia. Okay, so clearly India is going to deal with both of them. All right, and Canada, the way Canada has shown that Canada is going to diversify its whole entire exports and its trade and all, then for Canada to work with Russia is not gonna be a problem. Okay. And because of that, what's gonna happen is that India will need Canada and Russia in the Arctic, and after that, they will take the Arctic route and come back to India. And whatever they manufacture, it can go into European Union and other shorter supply chains, right? So that's the key. That is the mechanism number one for you. Okay. So what we're doing here is that it's about like linking two different strategic geographies into the same supply chain, right? And that's the first layer of strategic backup, energy resilience, right? You get it from Canada, you get it from Russia, and then what do? You have multiple trade corridors or trade routes that are secure, right? Vladivostok Chennai corridor. Who is going to attack Vladivostok Chennai corridor over there? Yeah, Strait of Hormuz was a problem. Iran is a weaker power, whatever you want to call it. Then Middle Eastern countries, most of the Middle Eastern countries are dependent on something else, right? So, but in Vladivostok Chennai corridor, that's not the case. Okay, so we know how important that becomes for India. All right, that's why I said that it's a first mechanism is the supply chain security. That's the strategic backup. And the second mechanism is defense cooperation. And this relationship basically goes back what decades since the dawn of humanity. Okay, India has been one of the largest operators of Russian military equipment for a very, very long time. In fact, let me actually first of all share my slide real quick. Okay, there you have it. So, in fact, for over last 20 years, Russian defense exports to India are estimated to be around $80 billion. That means Indian pilots, engineers, maintenance crews have spent years what working with Russian platform. Now, why all that matters? Because when two militaries operate the same system for decades, then they naturally develop what? They develop interoperability, right? And they understand each other's hardware, they understand each other's maintenance systems, they understand how those platforms operate in real situation. And that cooperation is still evolving. I mean, Russia and India, they actually do technology transfer on lots and lots of things. So for example, Russia recently showcased the what, Su-57 stealth fighter, and Russia is ready to do the technology transfer and full-fledged production in India of it. And then also Russians actually just cleared the long-range air-to-air missiles like the RVVBD, which is like related to R-37 missile family, at defense exhibitions in India. So, so now whether those deals happen or not, which chances are that they are going to happen, this is not even the main point. The main point is that technological cooperation is continuing, right? And then another layer was added recently. Okay, this is even more important that you can actually see in my slide here. That that what is that layer? The India and Russia signed the reciprocal exchange of logistics support agreement. They signed it in January and all. It was done behind way back, but finally all that has been cleared. What does this agreement basically allow is that both militaries to support each other's operations. That includes things like refueling, port access, maintenance, logistical supports, and the agreement allows up to 3,000 personnel, 10 aircraft, and 5 warships to operate under this framework. Right? So now think about what that actually means. Right? Two militaries basically can use each other's logistical infrastructure when needed. Right? And that creates something very important. It creates operational flexibility without a formal alliance. And that's what is needed when you want to secure your supply chains. Which means that India can actually put 3,000 personnel, 10 aircraft, and 5 warships and all that in the Arctic to secure that supply chain as well. So this is one thing that is developing right now, that is between India and Russia. But the way I'm looking at it is that if my calculations are correct, okay, then we may see this type of collaboration between India and Canada as well, where uranium already forms in a way, if you ask me, the uranium import from Russia, Canada, in a way, I'm not saying the exactly, forms a sort of, I would say, defense pact. Okay, that is a national security. And they may actually evolve this thing further too. As far as I know, that there have been some talks that are going on, sort of defense pact. And when that type of pact is actually implemented, then as per my calculation, that India is going to have that in the Arctic on the Canada side as well. Okay, so both supply chains need to be secured. And the third mechanism in this whole process, in this strategic backup, is payment systems. As we all know that Russia and India already trade in the national currencies, and this is one of the mechanisms, the one of the methods of strategic backup that lots and lots of people underestimate. But I think that strategic backup cannot be made more apparent and more clear than the payment system integrations that Russia and India are trading in the national currencies. Now, let me share my slide real quick, okay? And one of the biggest lessons, if anything, okay, from the last few years is that financial systems can be weaponized. Whether it is tariffs, whether it is sanctions, it's like tomato or tomato, it's all the same thing. Sanctions can disconnect countries from payment networks. Tariffs can make your export completely zero. They can nullify your whole entire export. And when all this happens, then trade can what? Trade can collapse overnight. It's not because goods don't exist, but because payments cannot be processed, right? So the countries have started looking for alternatives. That's why you will see that there is a rapid rise in the alternative payment systems, whether it is CIPS, whether it is SFS, whether it is MIR, whether it is UPI, whether it is Ostro, doesn't matter. It's just growing, okay? And India and Russia have been expanding national currency trade, particularly through rupee ruble settlement mechanisms. And the idea is very simple that two countries settle trade directly in their own currencies. They don't have to rely entirely on global financial system that might politically be controlled and that might be politically weaponized. Like today, it's Russia that is being sanctioned. If you look at it, then you notice that even China has been threatened for sanctions, right? That, okay, if you supply weapons to Iran, we are going to sanction you. We will apply secondary sanctions on you. So, what's the guarantee that this may not happen to India? Down the line, it's a possibility that Americans may just simply threaten India that, hey, if you don't kill your relationship with the Russians, then we will apply primary and secondary sanctions on you. I mean, we already see this news floating on X all the time that Scott Bessent saying that, oh, they have extended the sanctions license between India and Russia, oil purchase and this and that, right? So, and this is right here, the payment mechanism, payment system integration is the what? Strategic backup. This is what. Now, the fourth and final mechanism is diplomacy. See, India and Russia are not formal allies, they are strategic partners. And it's a very long name for their strategic partnership. Okay. Now, let me share my slide real quick here. Okay. And it's called some comprehensive special strategic partnership, something along those lines. And they share very similar diplomatic philosophy, and the philosophy is very simple, that is strategic autonomy. So when India actually maintains a deep relationship with Russia, then the primary reason is to maintain that strategic autonomy. Both countries, they prefer flexible partnerships rather than rigid alliance systems that have been there in the past, in the Soviet era, right, during the Cold War era. Now, think about it this way, that how a Cold War era superpower has changed its entire foreign policy after the Soviet Union's debacle. The power that was talking about bipolar world and all that, now it's talking about multipolar world. It's talking about multipolarity, right? And Russians are the ones that actually are the big proponent of what? BRICS, SCO, all these things. The multipolar world, the multilateral institutions and all that. Right? So that's why India and Russia, they cooperate where interests align, but they avoid getting locked into bloc politics. And this kind of relationship actually makes things a lot easier, right? And both sides actually see the beauty of Russia and India relationship is that the both sides they don't expect any kind of ideological alignment. And instead, if you look into it throughout the history, you find that the relationship between India and Russia it's built on practical cooperation, energy cooperation, defense cooperation, financial cooperation, just name it, right? And that's technological cooperation and all that too. And both governments have also discussed what expanding bilateral trade towards what $100 billion by 2030. And I think $100 billion between trade between Russia and India is actually it's a very conservative number if you ask me. And I'll tell you why I'm thinking this way. See, I think India is saying $100 billion because of the trade imbalance that exists right now. The moment India and Russia sort out that trade imbalance, okay, I think this trade is going to grow from $100 billion to 150 or $200 billion too. And that is a possibility. And this is why I'm saying the $100 billion number is a very conservative number. So, and diplomacy is what keeps all of these layers moving in the same direction. Like Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, they are pretty good friends. And also, Russians actually help India in vetoing in UNSC whenever there is a need. Now, even though India has another backup plan now in terms of France, France has been a very good partner for India for past many years. So France also helps India with the United Nations Security Council veto. So without this whole diplomatic coordination, all these mechanisms that I have talked about earlier, they will just be isolated deals. So it all actually, all these mechanisms that I'm talking about, the strategic backup and everything, it all actually is coming from the two leaders at the summit level, at the top level. Okay. So this is why if you notice that India and Russia they engage with each other each year. One year uh, Prime Minister Modi goes over there. Next year President Putin comes the following year. Like he visited in December in 2025, right? So that's how they do these things. And that's how they're forming what? A system, a strategic backup system to maintain their own strategic autonomy. So now, in the end, here's what I will say that when you step back, right? When you step back and take a look at the whole entire picture, the holistic view of these things, you see something very interesting actually. That India and Russia are not forming a traditional alliance. Instead, they are gradually building a strategic backup for each other, right? I mean, otherwise, why would you have cooperation at that deep level? Like supply chain wise, if you look into it, then Russia provides that guarantee that Russia can provide energy, natural resources for India's manufacturing needs to that is uninterrupted. That's the key here, uninterrupted at a reasonable price, right? Then energy supply chains that create the material depth. Then defense cooperation, it's operational flexibility. I mean, India is building it their own. In India is going to manufacture or build Russian equipments and all that with the technology transfer. What do you think that will do? What Russians are some sort of fool that they're giving all this to India for no reason? No, there is the reason is that when you're building Russian military hardware and you're manufacturing it in your own country, then that's the interoperability. That's automatic interoperability that you're going to do, right? And that is, of course, win-win for both countries, national security. Then payment system, right? Yes, it hurts India's economy, India's currency right now because of the trade balance. But trade imbalance is, I think, a temporary problem, okay, that can be addressed when you start to explore more avenues of the trade. And more avenues of the trade will be explored where? In the Arctic, when India will manufacture, then services, right? So Russians are going to start inviting, allowing lots and lots of Indian workers over there. All that is going to change, right? So in a world, I would say, where the global systems are becoming more and more fragile, this kind of strategic redundancy is very, very important. It has a special place, I would say. Okay. So instead of alliances, instead of doing anything else, they're building what? Backup systems, right? And what we are seeing between Russia and India is one of the prime examples of how those backup systems are starting to form. And chances are that we may see this thing happening with more and more countries. US had it, but you notice one thing, that because of the bad diplomacy, you have to understand this, because of the bad diplomacy, those backup systems did not respond, did not cooperate with the United States in this Iran war. Look at NATO, never responded. European allies simply said that we are not sending you any minesweeper or anything. Right? They did not provide any kind of interceptors or anything either. Right? So now you see why I said earlier that diplomacy is the key to bind everything together. Otherwise, it's just a deal. Okay, so this is it for this video, guys. Please do like and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.